What do you believe right now that's making you feel this way? And when you analyse it, you realise how irrational you can be at times.
Every single one of our major customers and minor customers all shut their doors overnight.
It's not sales per se, but the outcome of it is, because people get to know you, they get to see you.
But, what's the culture like at the business? What do we stand for, the values?
I've got to tick that box on my personal development programme I don't really want to be here.
Scaling up a business isn't easy. If it were, we wouldn't have less than 4% of businesses scaling beyond 10 employees or around £1 million turnover level, and less than 1% beyond 50 employees. But the contribution that we make as owner-managers to our economies is immense and should never be underestimated, yet it can be a tough gig for all of us at times. And only other business owners truly understand the challenges that we face. And through ScaleUp Radio, we aim to help make things a little easier. We interview guests who have been where you are now and may have faced some of the challenges that you are facing. And they offer their thoughts and advice on what has worked for them, as well as what didn't. And we've also combined many of the lessons from these interviews, and also through working with hundreds of owner managers over the last 10 years or so, into a practical scale-up handbook that we've called the Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System, or ESUS. And it's for owner managers like you and me as we navigate our own scale-up journey. And you can order a copy through your favourite online book retailer, or by going to all the W's, esusgroup.co.uk, www.esusgroup.co.uk. Today on ScaleUp Radio, I talk with Phil Anderton, and Phil set up ADHD 360 with a couple of colleagues about 5 years ago, and in that time they've grown to having 110 employees and 1,100 new patients per month. So phenomenal growth in that time, and it's all around ADHD and helping patients to lead their best life. That's what it's all about. And Phil's got such a really interesting background and so many experiences to draw on that really you can't fail to take something of huge value from this episode. So Phil started off in the police. So 20 years ago was when he first started looking into ADHD, but he rose to quite a senior level within the police before setting up ADHD 360 about 5 years ago. And we talk around the people side of things, around the leadership side of things. How do you keep control of a business that is growing that rapidly? But also he's in an environment where you might think, and there's regulation around this. We've got to make sure we establish that thought leadership, that credibility, that we really can provide the level of trusted service that you would expect, and complications around dealing then with the NHS as a potential partner. All sorts of great learnings and lessons within this episode, so I encourage you to go across and listen to the rest of Phil's story. Welcome to another episode of ScaleUp Radio. Today I'm joined by Phil Anderton, who is the founder and MD of ADHD 360. So Phil Anderton, welcome to ScaleUp Radio.
Good morning. It's good to be with you. Thank you.
Brilliant. So ADHD 360, there's a clue in the name, but what's that all about, Phil?
Well, yeah, the clue is in the name, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. It's the thing at the moment, isn't it? It's in the media. It's there to be tackled as a mental health issue across society. And it was 20 years ago when I started working with ADHD, and I guess where we are now, having a mental health service provider provision, is the culmination of 20 years' work. And the 360 bit is we try and do everything that the patient wants. So 360-degree service based on ADHD. So that's where we've come to over 20 years, really. 20 years of our graft.
Brilliant. And what, as business owners, what should we know about ADHD?
Oh, well, you've given me 45 minutes. Stand by for the 5-hour quick race. There's a lot said about ADHD, and there's a lot of myths and stories, and I think it's easy to discuss what ADHD isn't. And ADHD isn't a naughty boy syndrome that manifests only in the classroom. What I've found is ADHD is forget the medical side, we can discuss that if we need to, but what ADHD leads to, especially in adults, is an inability to focus, concentrate, plan your work, hold down relationships, have meaningful, productive conversations, influence people, which leads to anxiety, depressive thoughts, can lead to some pretty startling, nasty outcomes, right. Not least of which is withdrawal from the workplace, often some low feelings of self-worth, and general growing anxiety, which leads to inability. And I think when people talk about ADHD and think about the boy throwing the pen at the teacher, they're missing the point, really, that this is something that's quite pervasive, and employees, employers, healthcare professionals all need a greater awareness of the impact of ADHD. So there's 5 hours in about 30 seconds.
Brilliant. And how prevalent is it?
Oh, it's incredible. 5% of the general population have ADHD, and that puts the patient group into the millions. And I often get asked the question, how prevalent is ADHD? The better way of describing it, I think, rather than a statistic, which is just a number, is through anecdote. I went into the Apple store in Sheffield the other week, and I had a branded coat on. Mm-hmm. And the young man there, the floor walker, I said, I need some help with my iPhone. And he just went, whoa, whoa. I said, what's going on? And he said, I'm one of your patients. This is a city I very, very rarely visit. And he got all his friends over, and he was talking about how we changed his life and how he was holding down his job as a consequence of the interventions we've made. 2 days later, I'm on a train coming out of London, sat next to a couple of people around the table at the train, one of whom was a school teacher. We get talking about school teaching life and ADHD. The man on the seat on the other side of the aisle reached across and he said, are you Phil Anderton? I said, I am, yeah, who are you? Have we met? And he says, no, but I'm one of your patients. Where are you getting off the train? And I told him, and he said, I'm getting off there. Would you come and meet my wife? You've changed my life, and you changed her life as well. So the 5%, what I'm getting at there is the 5% is a number. I am coming across people with ADHD all the time. And that 5%, what that represents is we are all touching on people's lives who have ADHD. That's how prevalent it is. Right. I was in with solicitors a couple of weeks ago, and one of them, his daughter, has ADHD. It's everywhere. 5% represents pervasive and everywhere, and we can't afford to overlook it.
Right. So as business owners, the chances are that there's either people within our company or within our clients' companies, as well as obviously family and friends and people that are likely to have ADHD. Is that fair?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So
what is it that you do? You're changing people's lives by the sounds of it. So what is it that you do at ADHD 360?
Well, the strapline is changing people's lives, and that's exactly what we set out to do, and obviously change them for the better. And for many of our patients, we refer to our customers, if you will, as patients. It's a light switch moment. We throw a light switch of change. So we assess, diagnose, and treat medically people who have ADHD. And I was talking to a patient this morning who had started their meds today, so day 1 of medication. And she said, I've already not checked my personal email at work, and I normally do that 40 times an hour, which is incredibly disruptive. But I've been able to focus enough within 2 hours of taking my medicine and focused on my work and not flitting from one job to another and not checking my personal emails. So we assess, diagnose and treat people medically, and the change that comes into their life is dramatic. Now, for some people, it does take a bit more time. But if you can see change within 2 hours of starting treatment, I think we've probably got the most rewarding jobs on the planet when you can actually make that difference for people. And it is huge, the difference we make and the difference that's possible. So I'm really proud of what we do. I'm really quite honoured to have, at the age of 59, to have this privileged position where I'm in charge of an organisation that does that for 1,100 people every month, new patients every month.
1,100 new patients every month?
Yeah, and if you can imagine that each one of those has got either a mum, a dad, a child, a partner, we always use a multiplier of 5. So there's 5,500 people's lives we will change this month for the better through an assessment, diagnosis, and treatment process. I think that's a bloody good job.
Yeah, sounds phenomenal. And also presumably that means that if that's the new people every month, that there's a huge number that actually you've impacted over those 20 years.
Yeah. This business, ADHD 360, is in its 5th year. 20 years ago, I was a serving police officer, and I recognised the links between ADHD and criminal behaviour and poor social outcomes. So for over the last 5 years, we've been working with patients, and yeah, there's many thousands of people out there who proudly wear our badge, and that's a pretty good for me. I'm coming to the end of my working career now. Brackets, hopefully close brackets. But the company is one legacy, but the patient group is the larger legacy of a retirement hopefully well earned.
When you say patient group, is that a separate community or just part of the same process?
Well, I think we've got a separate community by mere nature of the identity of having come through ADHD 360's kind of treatment profile. But then you've got the wider community of people with ADHD who I've been involved in 20 years as well. There's people who have been in the criminal justice system that have helped along the way. There's people who've almost lost their jobs and been coached into keeping their jobs, and then we've got the medical treatment aspect from 360. So I think there is that whole community feel to the world of ADHD, and it's often looked at from the outside as something that's on the fringe of acceptable. Well, actually, everybody with ADHD is totally and utterly acceptable, and it's a beautiful place to work with people who've got lots of creativity, lots of innovative thoughts. They're impulsive, and they might interrupt you, and people may be struggling and they may have low self-esteem, but I generally found that people with ADHD are just magnificent people to work with, and why shouldn't we be doing it? Yeah,
great. And you mentioned you assess, diagnose, and treat. You also mentioned medication. I mean, what does the treatment look like? Is that interventions that include medication, or what does treatment generally look like?
It's a great question because it has to be answered honestly, and it has to be answered from the science, really, that question. And the science says that medication and medicine are the things that work, because what we're primarily tackling is a deficit of a couple of chemicals in a core part of the relevant part of the brain pathway. And what works and sustains help and sustains that positive change is medicines. And when delivered appropriately and built up over time to find the optimal dose, those medicines have a huge effect. But you've got to support that with an awful lot of help, work, and activity. If I was stood at a dry whiteboard now, I draw a vertical line, and at the bottom would be a 0, and at the top would be 100. And I'd be saying that there's 100 units of improvement available to a patient who starts on a treatment pathway for their ADHD. Medicine will get you to 80. And what we need to do then is take you beyond 80 up to the 100 through scaffolding support and talking therapy, more understanding of you as an individual, more help for you, more guidance, and get you from the 80 up to the 100. What people can sometimes get wrong is try and do the 80 to 100 bit first, and expect somebody who can't focus, can't concentrate, to actually start to concentrate and focus just because we now know what's going on with them, as opposed to putting them in a position medically where they're then in a position to respond. So it is a combination that works to its fullest extent. For some patients, they get to 80 and it's 80 units better than they've ever had in their life before, and they can call it quits and be satisfied. But for many, we look to get them from the 80 up towards the 100 with additional support. And for me, that gets really exciting because, talking to a patient and his mum only last week, he's 20. His life story is quite incredible. And if we spend a minute on it, it plays into everything we've discussed so far. At the age of 14, 15, wanted to leave school as soon as possible, couldn't articulate why, but hated it. It was as bright as a button. got through his GCSEs, his first set of exams, because he's a bright lad. He got okay results, but it transpires, he never did any revision, any extracurricular work on it, and just blagged it on the day.
Right.
Immediately after those exams, he was assessed, diagnosed, and started treatment for ADHD. And his anxiety lifted, his feeling of self-worth and self-esteem lifted. And he thought, I'm going to have a crack at A-levels, the next set of exams for me here. I'm going to take on 2 years additional study because I now feel a sense of worth. And he did, and he aced his A-levels. He then went on to start work at university as an undergraduate, studying business. But within 6 months found that he wasn't stimulated and it wasn't helping him, the lack of stimulation, lack of structure, and lack of scaffolding around his life. And he wanted to quit. So he had a coaching session with us. And we put that into place. We put scaffolding, structure, challenge into his life. We were now on the 80 to 100 piece. Yep. And he went and found part-time work to give him even more structure under guidance. And he now works 20 hours a week, part-time, while studying full-time at university. He's getting 2 1s in his degree work, and he's got a career ahead of him. This was a 15-year-old lad who had no future and didn't care about that, to somebody now that's acing his degree. He's just finished year 2. He's got 1 year left to do. He's in an organisation that have indicated they'll employ him forevermore once he graduates. And they're putting scaffolding and structuring into place for him under guidance. And what you've got there is that whole combination of life skills, understanding, medicine, scaffold, structure, support, coaching. His mum still rings him at 8 o'clock every morning to get him out of bed for work because he needs that.
Right.
And there's 2 things going on there. One is his ADHD and managing time and what have you. Until he starts his medicine in the morning, he's classically ADHD untreated. So mum rings him, gets him to take his medicine and get out of bed, and then he's delivering his best life. And the point being that he's always going to need that little bit of help. But what the hell? Give him that little bit of help and then watch him go ahead and lead his best life. And the expression "lead your best life" is one that we use a hell of a lot. And I get really excited with those stories, Kevin, of how we enable and facilitate people to have their best life.
Yeah, absolutely, and I can feel the passion in as you're describing it, which is brilliant. So, does that mean then that you have to link in with the NHS from a prescribing point of view? Do you have your own clinicians? How does that work?
So we have a team of 50 clinicians, right. Ranging from psychiatrists, psychologists, nurses, pharmacists, and we have as many support staff in the offices as well, and they do a lot of patient interest. And all of our clinicians are licensed prescribers of medicine. So we do the whole thing soup to nuts. We do link in with the NHS. We work for the NHS. Proudly, we work for the NHS, delivering services for them across different parts of the country under contract. And when we've got a patient to the stage where they are leading their best life with their ADHD symptoms and impairment, we seek to hand them to their GP for their prescribing of medicine, but we carry on looking after them for their ADHD. And that's a system called shared care. Right. And we literally do share care with the GP. And when that happens, that's a magnificent moment for the patient because their prescribing comes under the NHS cost mechanism, but their care is still with an organisation such as us, providing that ADHD specialist care. And that's a great milestone.
Brilliant. And I imagine, not in all cases, but I imagine in many of the cases, your customers, do you call them customers? Do you call them clients? Do you call them patients? You call them patients. Yeah. So your patients may not have lots of money. So how does the business model work for you?
You're pulling out some great questions here, Kevin. You really are. When we bear in mind, I was a cop when we started. When I started all of this, so moving into entrepreneurial business was an interesting journey for me. And one of the things, sat down with Lisa, one of my co-founders, and we were talking about the costing model. And she said, "Can we not just do it for nothing?" And she's a huge Christian. She's got a big heart. And I said, well, as a business model, I'm not sure doing it for nothing is really going to cut it. I'm not sure that's going to work. So we developed a very, I think, revolutionary, still unique costing model where the patient pays a one-off fee. And that fee is the easiest way of likening it is to an all-inclusive holiday, where no matter how many drinks you have, how many meals you have, you paid your one flat fee. And that will see you through your first year of treatment, so that the patient doesn't have any anxiety about what is this going to cost month on month. Can I afford to have my consultation? There's none of that thinking. It's all done. And that one-off fee then, that has to be relevant both for the commercial needs of an organisation, but also for the private funded needs of the patient. So we developed this model. And I took it to here in Lincoln, where we sit. I took it to the lady that runs the Lincolnshire ADHD support group, who I'd known for a number of years, and she can be brutally frank and brutally honest to a very strong position with ADHD advocacy. And I ran this costing model past her because I felt as if she could agree that was a relevant costing model, then we'd be okay. She was a good litmus test. And Sharon is her name. And she turned around to me at the end of the meeting and she said, so where are you running these clinics? I said, well, we're going to start with Sheffield, Manchester, London, blah, blah, blah. And she said, well, if you don't bring this model and this costing model to Lincoln, I'm going to hate you and I'm never going to talk to you again. And at that point, I reckon that we've got it just about right. So our price point is very relevant for the community, recognising that they are hard up, or can be, rather. But we also have a package, and we call them packages because of that package price. We have a package, our silver package that we call it, which is specifically targeted for people on universal credit. So where people really are financially on their arse, we've got that rationale from Lisa. Can't we do it for nothing? Well, no, we can't. But let's cut our costs down to the point where it is loss-making for us. But let's help people get back on their feet with the silver package. And that's a bursary that we grant to people to get them in a position to change their life and move things forward. And almost at our expense. They put a lot of skin in the game still. We can structure payments over time to make it affordable. And we've got one lady in Norfolk, East Anglia, who pays us £10 a week. And we've got her daughter back into school and now performing in school for £10 a week. And do you know what? That's as close to Lisa, can we not do it for nothing, than I think we'll ever get. There's a great story of one of our first ever patients who was a delivery driver for one of the big national delivery companies. And their business model is you rock up for work, you're given a list of packages that need to go, and you need to plan your route, plan your list, and you get paid per drop-off.
Yeah.
So for someone who can't organise their time or can't organise their life, can't organise their diary, can't schedule things and then can't remember what they've done, that job was not best suited for her as an undiagnosed, untreated person with ADHD. Anyway, she was doing about 20 drops a day when she started with us. And within 3 weeks of treatment, she was up to 80 and now beyond 100 drops a day. And bear in mind, she's paid per drop. We have literally changed her life. And she was paying the universal credit lowest silver package and literally turned it around. And, and the flip side of the coin was she had incredible high anxiety and low self-esteem. And then I was out and about a couple of years after first seeing her. I literally was just walking down the road and she stopped me with her new partner to introduce me to her partner. And she is clearly leading her best life. And those are the stories. Those are the anecdotes that get me and my team out of bed in the morning, because we know we can make that difference. And to go back to the point of the question, it's affordable.
Yeah, sounds absolutely brilliant. Is there any? What are my alternatives from coming to you? What are my options? Obviously, I can remain undiagnosed, I suppose, but what if I feel or a family member feels that there's something there? What are my options other than you? I
think the first thing we have to acknowledge is our NHS is under incredible pressure. And I think it's all too easy for commentators to drop into a negative storyline about that. And the horror tales of 5-year plus waiting lists are genuine. They are tales and they are horrible. But would any of us want to be the commissioner of health that makes a decision where the public purse gets spent, whether it's spent on cancer treatment or mental health treatment? I certainly wouldn't want to be.
Absolutely not.
And I can't be overly critical of the fact that not all of the money that the NHS has is going into a therapy area that I'm working in. Because that would mean if I was poorly with something else, there might not be the care for me with that something else. And that job is the role that none of us would ever want. So what we have to do is accept that we have an NHS free at the point of delivery, but it's under pressure. And if we can't sit that pressure out, for whatever reason, then we have to look for alternatives. So you can go to the NHS, and that is viable for a lot of people. In some areas, the waiting list is 5 years plus. In other areas, it may not be. And especially, I think, for young children, waiting 5 years is an inappropriate time. You know, that you go from the age of 12 to have left school, and you could be that young lad that never got to achieve his potential. So you have got the NHS. That's my point. And I'm not going to be critical of it because I think it provides a wonderful service and does the best with what it's got. You've got this strange phenomenon called patient choice, right to choose, which came about out of physical health in the UK, where a particular geography may not offer this style of cancer treatment, for an example, but maybe that's Kent, but in Birmingham they do.
Yeah.
You can elect to be seen in Birmingham because they provide that treatment, whereas your local area doesn't. And patient choice came legislatively into the NHS way of working to avoid the postcode lottery. That's crept into mental health. So you can avail yourself of patient choice. It's called right to choose, RTC, right to choose. And patients can use right to choose to elect who they go and have their services from. And as long as that provider that they choose is an NHS provider and is providing to the NHS the service that you are looking for, you can choose to go anywhere in the country. And so we are an NHS provider. We're licensed to provide services under contract to the NHS. And we set out to be part of the solution to the 5-year waiting list with that. And we find ourselves now with an 18-month waiting list ourselves because of demand for that.
Gosh.
But 18 months compared to 5 years, take your chances. So you've got all three avenues. You've got private, which I would argue is affordable. You've got right to choose, which has a small waiting list, but nowhere near the scale of our national provision. And if you can afford to wait it out, you've got your local NHS provisions. So actually, as somebody who thinks they've got impairment and symptoms of ADHD, I think you have a whole plethora of choices there. And of course, there are other private providers, and the patient should make an educated choice. They should shop around. They should make sure that the philosophy of where they're going fits how they think they want their treatment to be. We are very much medically led. There are organisations that aren't. There are therapy led.
Yeah.
We have this belief, the 100 units, 80, then 20, and that's all built on science and 20 years of experience. But if that doesn't suit the particular patient, there are alternatives out there. And I think it's fantastic that we've got not competition, because I think we've got complementary services up and down the country. And the patient has genuine choice. And I think that's really exciting.
Excellent. So I'm fascinated to know, fascinated so far already, but I'm fascinated to know how you go from being a copper 20 years ago to setting up the business five years ago, and now having a business where you've got 1,100 new patients every month. You've got a network of 50 clinicians. You know, that's no small feat. So tell us some of the milestones along the way.
Wow. Well, that all starts with I'm sat as a middle-ranking police officer in an office at police headquarters in Preston in Lancashire, and my chief constable, a guy called Paul Stevenson, Sir Paul Stevenson, as he became, who was a huge charismatic character, great leader of people, burst into my office and basically said, there's too many young people coming into crime. The Home Office have noticed and we need to do something about it. Over to you, Phil. And he kind of rolled that grenade into the office and then run away as quickly as possible before it blew up. I was given a small team of people to work with. I sent them all away. They had a couple of weeks to go away and come up with something that we were doing in policing, but we could do better, that would tackle the problem, or something that had never been done before that could actually break some new pots and be a bit of a minor revolution. One lad, Steve Brown, tremendous man, he came back and he said, look, I found this thing called ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's as genetically passed through families as height. And he says, I think this is the root of some of our problems, that we've got what we would call in policing problem families, and nobody's getting to grips of their mental health issue with their ADHD.
Right.
5% of the population, 25% of the prison population have ADHD.
Is that right?
So that disparity is huge.
Yeah.
And you're pulling all the right levers at this part of the conversation for a senior cop who's charged with responsibility. So we started looking at that. The hypothesis being that there was that causational factor to poor social outcomes, including crime and criminal behaviour. Mm-hmm. We confirmed the hypothesis. We've been fortunate, and I still am fortunate, to work with some of the greatest research scientists in the world on ADHD. And we reached out to them as two humble cops from Lancashire, and they all came back to us and said, you're absolutely right. No one else is looking at it. How can we help? So we started then to build the argument. We took it back to the chief and we said, look, this is completely left field. We're very nervous about going public with this causational link, but it's there. And here's the science. And he got it. He just got it straight away. And he said, right, what do you need? Let's go and do it. Let's be the first and let's make it happen. So we did. We influenced local policy, then national policy. We worked in prison settings, and I've worked in prisons both in the UK and the USA. I've worked with courts. I've written a guide for courts and a guide for police officers. And I'm not saying for 1 minute we got it all right, we got everything done, but we certainly started to get some traction. My policing career moved on and changed roles and got promoted a couple of times and what have you. But I carried on working with ADHD. I'd written a book by then, and that put a certain amount of traction under my positioning with ADHD and crime. And I guess some people were regarding me as an expert in the field. So I kept on working and kept on doing it. And then I came to retire from the cops. I joined the police with a cycling proficiency and a bunch of O-levels, and I retired at the age of 43 with a PhD, a master's degree in education, and a business degree. And my second career started in management consultancy. I ended up working for PwC, nationally and internationally in public sector work, and then went out on my own, worked in health, still working on ADHD stuff at the side, and then managed to get a 2-year piece of work embedded in the NHS ADHD clinics up and down the country, seeking improvement and improvement opportunities to get more patients into ADHD clinics on behalf of the NHS. I liken that to pushing water uphill with my fingers open. I got very wet but didn't have much success. So I grabbed 2 clinicians and said, look, we've whinged and moaned about the state of this for far too long. Let's quit our 6-figure jobs and let's just go and do it. And that was it. 5 years ago, we started ADHD 360. Lisa is a pharmaceutical expert, a nurse who's studied and worked with all of the medicines for ADHD for a long time. And Jen Lewis-Neal was on the panel that wrote the NICE guidelines for ADHD. Right. I'd set up adult services and children's services for ADHD. And the 3 of us set off to do it. We were shortly joined by a lady who's now my wife, Samantha. So I didn't only get a company, I got a wife.
Very good.
Yeah, a bit of a bargain deal there. Didn't see that one coming. And we set 360 up, and so we marched on. We thought we'd see 20 patients a month, and that would be okay financially and in terms of capability. And Here we are now with 110 employees seeing 1,100 a month. And we still pinch each other, because in 5 years, that's a phenomenal growth.
Absolutely.
We bring the whole organisation together twice a year for training and a social event. And we inevitably open my presentation and speech at the start of that evening of the social with, well, who'd have thought? And, who'd have thought? Here we are. And it's incredible. It's frightening. It's daunting. It's exhausting. But that's the journey from poacher to gamekeeper, really, from on behalf of policing, begging the NHS to see more people, to now being the provider of that. And a whole new approach.
So how do you keep control then of that rapid growth, from pretty much 0 to 110 employees in 5 years? How do you manage that? How do you keep control of it all?
Well, the honest answer is I don't keep control of it. I've got some bloody good people working with me now who keep control of it for me. And
right.
I've built a fantastic team of the nervousness around our first ever external hire, a lady called Ashley Thorpe. The nervousness I had about bringing somebody onto the payroll, what's a payroll, was incredible.
Yeah.
But she's been promoted twice. She's now head of operations, and she leads the operations function now. And from coming in to be a secretary, and we still laugh about, in her job description, was making sure the photocopier had enough paper in it. And here she is now head of ops with a 50-strong team delivering that capability for us. So the answer to the question is by having the right people and being prepared to let go of control. I could not possibly run this organisation like I used to run it when there were 3 of us. So I've got key people. We've got a deputy clinical director working underneath Lisa, Rebecca, and she runs the medical side. We've got team leaders who work to her. We've got head of quality. We've got a quality assurance director. And it's about having a proper organisational structure, really.
Yeah.
My PhD was in workforce competence. And I think what any entrepreneurial leader has got to be prepared to do is recognise your own failings and be prepared to let go. I remember the days when I could do everything this job did, but now I wouldn't have a clue how. And I go to people and say, how do we do that? How does that work? And they look at me and say, well, you're the MD. I said, yeah, I'm the bloody MD. Do you want to come and have the strategy meeting with the commissioners? Or do you want to come and do, we've all got our separate roles. And I find that truly exciting that I have let go and I no longer know the detail.
So how do we get the confidence to be able to let people go and trust in them without just simply abdicating responsibility? So how do you manage that delegation rather than abdication aspects and make sure you still got your fingers on the pulse?
The answer to that question, I think, actually lies twofold. One is recruiting the right people, and that's an art form, isn't it? And there's a bit of voodoo science and good luck in there, no matter what processes we have. And then the second one, I genuinely believe it is about how we train, coach, and mentor people to take that role, and don't give it them until they're ready to take it. So, if I look at Ashley as the best example, in each growth spurt that she's had in the organisation, she's never been thrown at something she can't cope with, but she has been thrown at stuff that's been a challenge, and it's about having that balance and that dialogue with her. I remember the first day I asked her to take a call from a patient. The look on her face was one of absolute horror. But now she's the person training other people to train people to do that. And she's running a team of 40-odd people who do that day in, day out. And she's the person passing on that competence to other people. So it's about, I refer to it as bounded freedom. There's a boundary.
Okay.
And your job is to operate within that boundary. If you feel the need to go outside that boundary, come to me and I'll help you. But each week, each month, each year, we expand that boundary, and we do that together. And that bounded freedom is where I want you to operate, and you need to be competent to operate, and you need to feel that competence. And when we sign off a clinician as competent to go and do the job, it's a mutual decision. We say, we think you're now ready to be a clinician for 360. Do you feel ready? And if you don't, what can we do to get you to that point? And the mutuality of that decision-making is fundamentally important. And I think that's part of where we don't abrogate our responsibilities. We actually accept them. And not daily, but regularly, I'll touch base with the Ashleys of the company and sort of say, how are you? How's it going? What can I help with? And I think that's the most important thing is is to be available for that help and guidance. And even the head of quality will come to me and say, how the hell do I deal with this? And I might not know the answer, but if we sit down and spitball it together and work it through, and off she goes to go and work it through, I feel that's a leadership job well done myself.
Great. And what do you see as some of the differences? Because you've worked in an environment in the police where there's an established hierarchy, and essentially somebody higher up the chain says jump, you ask how high. Very different in a private organisation. So what have you seen there? How have you managed that transition?
Interesting, isn't it? Because there still has to be a hierarchy in every flat organisation. And in terms of organisational design, trying to explain to somebody that we have a very flat culture, but we still have to have a hierarchy. It's almost a juxtaposition between the two statements there, isn't it? But that is, for me, that is an organisational reality. We run a training academy every month for new joiners, especially clinical. And we take some of the office staff on that to get them skilled up way beyond what their need is, but to give them that skill set and understanding of the medicine. And one of them at the last academy said to me in the wings, in the margins, she said, have you responded to that email I sent you the other day? And I went, what email? She said, I sent you an email, it's quite important. And I said, right, no, I haven't clocked that. She said, well, I really need you to respond to it, please. And I looked at her and I said, 100% I will do, and I'll do it before the close of play today, but just got to tell you, that's brilliant, that you feel you can come to me and hold me to account for not responding to an email from you. And the fact that you told me how important it is for you, and you feel that you can put that value on that email and not hide behind it. And I use that tale now quite a lot with my team and my senior team, because if we can't be held accountable by the people that are working for us, we've lost the plot. We've absolutely become untouchable managers that have got no hope in hell of being empathetic and relevant.
Yeah.
And that flatness of behaviour is really, really important. And then beyond that, what everybody's got is their role. So my role now is very much focused at the strategic direction of the organisation. I've got a load of people doing the tactics, and then I've got a load of people doing the operational side. And that stratification is something that came out of policing, come out of the military, strategic, tactical, operational, and stay in your lane. I don't want people running the strategy of the organisation when they should be answering the phone. And I don't want people who should be running the strategy of the organisation answering the phone necessarily, unless there's a deliberate reason to step out of your lane. So we stay in our lane unless we're deliberately stepping out. And if that's a deliberate manoeuvre, then that's totally and utterly acceptable. It's when it's not by design, it becomes a little bit clunky and we tread on each other's toes. So I know where my lane is, and my lot keep me in it. They'll say to me, look, just leave that. Don't touch that, Phil. Just go away. Leave that alone. And then I'll say to them, well, do you want to be part of this bit that I'm doing? Personal development? No, do I? Hell, you bloody get on with that. Leave it alone. And that, I think that there's humour in there, but I think that's really relevant, is that we know where our position is. We know what it is. But I can walk into any of the offices or be with the clinicians, and I can take it on the chin, and my senior team can take it on the chin. And you have to be available. There's a great scene I think it was in The Office, that great expose of workplace culture, where the manager says to one of his staff, my door is always open. You can come and see me whenever you want. And he gets up to leave, and he says, "Oh, just shut the door on your way out." And we have to recognise that leadership is part and parcel of everybody's role. I expect the junior staff to lead within their profession and within their competence, but it is an art form, leadership, and I think we can get it very, very wrong if we're not careful, and if we are too far up in our own position and our own letterhead, then we can lose it, and we have to guard against that.
Excellent. Brilliant. Well, I'm sure we could explore that for a lot longer. I know I'm conscious of the time. Are you all right for a couple of sort of quick questions before we wrap?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm interested on the legacy. You mentioned legacy before, and you said you're 59 and maybe in brackets thinking about retiring at some point. What's the legacy that you want to leave, or have you already left it, do you think?
Well, the legacy I want to leave is an organisation that can still serve this community, first and foremost, in a fit state to do it without me, without Lisa, and without Samantha, the other director. That's primarily the first thing, because that's the sustainability piece, isn't it?
Yeah.
That it will carry on. And then, of course, there is the footprint of what we have done for people. And for those patients to be proud of having their ADHD being neurodiverse, and we just started in autism as well. So it's autism and ADHD. And for those patients to be proud of who they are, what they've done and what they've come through, that's a huge legacy piece, that we've got that piece of pride within the community. And then I guess the last piece of legacy, which is probably going to carry on beyond retirement, I would suspect, is that we continue to challenge the lack of equity for people who are neurodiverse. And we can bring employment, education, social standards up to a position of equity, where people who are struggling with their own emotions and behaviours are not seen as being so different that we can't tolerate them in society. That would be the huge piece to end with.
Fantastic. Great. So one or two really quick questions then. So if you go back to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself?
Whoa. Trust your gut and trust other people until they let you down. That I really believe in that. Right back at the start of my degree, my business degree, I read a book by Charles Handy called The Empty Raincoat. And there's a line in there where he says, trust is like a pane of glass. Once it's shattered, you might have all the pieces, but it'll never look the same again. Yeah. And what he's getting at there is trust people within bounded freedom, and until they let you down. And I think there's too many people don't trust people off the get-go. And I think I've always worked with, it's yours to make a mess of, so let's get on and do it. And that's a huge piece of learning for me.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you very much for that. And the next question was going to be any books or podcasts you'd recommend. So The Empty Raincoat presumably is one of those you'd recommend.
Yeah, well, a great business book that. There's so many books out there, aren't there? And there's a chap called Professor Russell Barkley who writes on ADHD, and he's a legend. And I'm very privileged to call him a friend. And he goes right back to day one of this 20 years ago when I contacted him and reached out to him. And he picked up the phone and wrote and rang me, and we had that conversation. He's written many, many books. He's the go-to on this, together with another author, Tom Brown, who writes about ADHD and autism. And then, of course, there's other bodies of work around this subject matter, and we should always just be seeking to learn, and we should learn something every day. So whether it's a podcast, whether it's an article, a pamphlet, or in modern terminology, if it's a YouTube clip, it's a TikTok clip. God knows how to do it. I have to have younger people around me to help me with that stuff. But yeah, modern means of communication really are satisfying modern needs for brevity. And I would encourage everybody to exploit every channel for their learning.
Right.
And, when we read, we kind of believe what we read, but some of it's unbelievable and shouldn't be taken on face value just because it's in a book. And it's exactly the same with social media, TikTok, all these other things. So read, learn, listen, look, but do it with an open mind and make your own judgments about what you think resonates with you and why, and look for triangulation, look for confirmation, but keep learning, keep pushing forwards. And that's going to be the key to success.
Brilliant. You mentioned technology. Are there any apps or bits of technology that you find particularly you have a favourite?
I don't have time for
apps. Things, yeah.
I'm also 59. I've mentioned it twice. It's way beyond me, some of this technology these days. It really is.
Okay.
So, when I do have any downtime, I'm really sad, and I will go to an app that tells me what aeroplanes are flying, where to, where from, and I look at that and I look in the sky, and mainly military stuff I track, and I look at it and I just think, wow, that's just amazing that's happening. So just the advice there is just use technology to give you what you want out of life.
And what's that app called?
I use one called 360 Radar. It's absolutely unbelievable. So last night, to close this out, last night my wife and I watched the UK Lancaster bomber fly over the previous home of the Dam Busters, because it was 80 years last night from the Dam Busters mission, and it flew over their previous home, and we were there drink in hand, and I tracked it on the radar to see it was coming, and we were ready for it with hundreds of other people. And that just brought a late evening smile.
Brilliant. Love it. Phil, thank you very much indeed for being my guest today on ScaleUp Radio. If people would like to contact you or find out more about ADHD 360, what's the best way for them to do that?
Website, pretty standard, ADHD-360.com. Reach out. Be lovely to hear from people. The world is made richer by communication with human beings, I believe. So, if anyone wants to reach out, you can get me through there. I naturally now, by mere nature of the role, I have a fire door called Freya, who looks after all my communication inbound for me and protects me well. She tells me off if I try and manage my own diary. She gives me a slap if I start to do things without her assistance, which goes back to the flat structure, doesn't it? So, through the website, and watch for us on social media. We're doing a hell of a lot. And we do a lot of free webinars and free events for people who want to learn more about ADHD very regularly, normally of an evening.
Phil, thank you very much indeed for being my guest today.
Thanks, Kevin. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if you're building and scaling your own business, you might well be interested in our book, The Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System. And it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's a practical handbook around scaling a business in a structured way. And you can order a copy on all your favorite online retailers, including an audio version, or you can find it and other supporting resources on our website, www.esusgroup.co.uk. That's esusgroup.co.uk, which is esusgroup.co.uk.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.